New Mexico, high desert, endless silence. And Taos, a town where reality blurs. This isn't the kind of place people end up by accident. Artists, mystics, loners, they come here searching for meaning or losing it. The 1st of September, 1998, Labor Day. A young man walks into the wild, not for a hike, not for a retreat, but for something else. His name is David Stone, 29 years old, tall, fit, and intense. The kind of man who commands a room, even when he says nothing. He was a stockbroker from La Jolla, California. Successful, spiritual, driven. But in the days before he vanished, something had changed. He was restless, paranoid, repeating cryptic phrases, talking about a war only he could see. The night before his disappearance, he'd hosted a party at his Taos home. There was alcohol, loud music. Neighbors saw guests come and go. But what happened after? No one knows. The next morning, David drove deep into the high desert, miles from any road. No food, no water, no supplies. He left his car near the base of the Cabresto Canyon. Then he walked away. It took 4 days before anyone realized he was missing. When police arrived at the scene, they found the car unlocked. Inside, a crumpled piece of paper. On it, strange, jumbled notes, astrological symbols, a reference to the number 1, 4, 8, and scrawled in red ink, one line. They think the word is in the safe. To the authorities, it made no sense. To his friends, it was terrifying, because David had always been drawn to codes, to puzzles, to secret meanings. He believed the universe was trying to tell him something. And for a while, it seemed the messages were coming in loud and clear. In the months before his disappearance, David had become obsessed with numerology. He talked about vibrations, frequencies, how certain numbers aligned with higher realms. But somewhere along the way, it went too far. He told friends he was being followed, that they were trying to stop him, that he was on a spiritual mission and the forces of darkness were closing in. Was it a psychotic break? A spiritual awakening? Or something stranger? Search teams combed the canyon for days. Helicopters, bloodhounds, volunteers, nothing. Until 2 weeks later, deep in the brush, they found footprints. One set, barefoot, moving in strange, erratic circles. A trail of confusion, like a man chasing ghosts or running from them. Nearby, they discovered a makeshift shrine, rocks arranged in a spiral, a burned candle, and at the center, a dead lizard impaled on a twig. Ritual? Message? Breakdown? There were no answers, no body, no sign of struggle, just absence. David Stone had vanished, not just from the world, but from logic itself. And in the years since, no trace has ever surfaced. No credit card use, no sightings, no bones. Some believe he's still alive, hiding under a new identity. Others say he perished in the desert. But then, there are those who whisper something darker, that he opened a door he wasn't meant to, and whatever he found on the other side took him. Two weeks after David's disappearance, the desert was still whispering. Search teams had given up. The winds had erased the footprints. The candle wax had melted into the dirt. But the mystery that remained. Back in town, David's family arrived. His father, a stoic man from Arizona. His younger sister, red-eyed and restless. They plastered missing posters on every pole in Taos. But something didn't feel right. This wasn't just a missing person. This was something deeper. The investigators reviewed David's journals. What they found was a descent page by page into obsession. Lines of numerology, sketches of pyramids, references to the Book of Revelations, and everywhere, the number 148. 148 is the key, he wrote. That's when the door opens. To what door? No one could say. But the more they read, the clearer it became. David Stone believed he was chosen. Not metaphorically, literally. He spoke of a cosmic awakening, of battling invisible forces, of being tested through fire, through solitude, through madness. And then, something stranger emerged. In one entry dated 2 weeks before his vanishing, he wrote, "They told me I'd forget the way back, that I must build the altar first, that the lizard is a sign of transition." This wasn't just spiritual crisis. This was ritual preparation. David didn't get lost. He planned it. One journal entry included a list of coordinates leading into remote desert locations. When authorities followed them, they found nothing, just dry earth, twisted brush, and silence. But for some, that silence said everything. A Navajo tracker who joined the search believed David had entered what his people call the spirit path, a liminal space between the world of the living and the dead. Some men disappear because they run, he said, but this one, he crossed. Meanwhile, David's friends struggled with guilt. Some had noticed his unraveling. One said he'd confessed to seeing shadows in mirrors. Another recalled him talking about the veil thinning between realities. One woman, a former girlfriend, admitted something chilling. 2 nights before he vanished, David had called her at 2 a.m. He said he was leaving the map, and if she ever wanted to find him, she'd have to stop thinking like a human. Then he hung up. When she tried calling back, his phone was already disconnected. So what really happened to David Stone? There are 3 prevailing theories. Theory 1, the breakdown. That David, under pressure from his high-stakes career, suffered a psychotic break. That the numerology, the rituals, the shrine were the symptoms of a mind in collapse. He wandered into the desert and died of exposure. Clean, tragic, simple, but too simple. Theory 2, the disappearance. That David faked it all. That he wanted to vanish to escape modern life and become someone else. A new name, a new city, a new self. There are people who swear they've seen him in Arizona, in Nevada, even in Belize. Always alone, always watching. But no sighting has ever been confirmed. No fingerprints, no bank activity, nothing. Theory 3, the crossing. That David believed too deeply, and something answered. That the rituals meant something. That the numbers opened something. That the desert took him. Wild? Maybe. But if you ask those who knew him best, it's the one that feels closest to the truth. Because David didn't just talk about transformation. He lived it. And maybe, in some cosmic equation, he became it. Today, the trail is cold. The shrine is gone. But the story lingers like static on an empty radio channel. And every so often, a hiker will report something strange in the Cabresto Canyon. Footprints where there should be none. A flickering candle in the brush. Or a whisper carried by the wind. 1, 4, 8. Before the disappearance, there were signs, but no one saw them for what they were. David Stone wasn't the type to unravel in public. He smiled at meetings. He made his trades. He held conversations with precision and charm. But under the surface, something ancient was stirring. His descent didn't start in the desert. It started months earlier in a luxury condo overlooking the Pacific. Back in La Jolla, neighbors recalled late-night chanting, weird music vibrating through the walls, strange visitors who never stayed long. One man, a neighbor in the same building, claimed he once saw David in the elevator at 3 a.m. He was barefoot, mumbling to himself, holding a book with no title, bound in black leather. He didn't even blink, the neighbor recalled. He just stared, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. David had become obsessed with liminality, the thresholds between worlds, dreams and waking, order and chaos, life, and what waits beyond it. In his journals, he described threshold rituals. He wrote about Egyptian myths, Hopi traditions, and the Tibetan bardo, always circling the same idea. To cross over, the self must die. It wasn't metaphor. It was method. And that's what scared his closest friend, Marcus Lynn, a fellow broker turned spiritual seeker. Marcus and David had bonded over Eastern philosophy. But in the final weeks, David pulled away deeper into his own mythology. He kept saying he had to shed the skin, Marcus said. At first, I thought it was metaphorical, but then he asked me if I'd help him fake his death. Marcus thought it was a joke. David laughed it off, but his eyes weren't laughing. Around this time, David withdrew all his savings, over $40,000 in cash. None of it was ever found. He also bought several rare books online, some of which have never been recovered. One was titled Portals and Places Between. Another, The Pathless Path. When investigators tracked the seller, they found something even stranger. David had written a message with his order. Not a question, not a note, but a phrase. I'm ready for the turn. The seller thought it was a poetic flourish. The FBI wasn't so sure. They launched a quiet inquiry into David's digital life. No red flags, no affiliations, no evidence of foul play. But what they did find was absence. David had deleted most of his emails, wiped his phone, cleared browser history, even physically destroyed his external hard drive. Pieces of it were found in a trash can behind his building. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a cleansing. He was erasing David Stone. One last remnant remained, an old voicemail on his office landline. It was left 2 days before he disappeared. The message: you are not your name. You are not your body. You are not this place. When the shadow turns east, begin. No caller ID. The number was untraceable. David never mentioned the message to anyone, but one colleague said that after hearing it, David sat in silence for a full hour. Then he got up and quit. No 2 weeks' notice. No transition plan. Just walked out. He told the receptionist, I'm going to Taos. It's time. That was the last time anyone saw David Stone in California. From that point on, it was all dust and symbols. But there's one last puzzle, something even the FBI couldn't decode. Tucked inside the lining of his car's glove box, they found a scrap of parchment. Not notebook paper. Not printed. Old, like it came from another century. It had been carefully folded into a triangle. On it, a hand-drawn spiral with 13 dots circling the outer edge. And in the center, 2 words, written in Latin, Invenite. It will find you. Who or what was it? And had David already been found? The desert doesn't forget. It buries, preserves, whispers. Weeks after David's trail went cold, an amateur hiker stumbled upon something that would reignite the case. It was a mile off the original search grid, a narrow ravine surrounded by wind-sculpted rock. There, nestled under a flat stone, was a perfectly arranged pattern of pebbles, not random, not natural. A spiral again. 13 stones. A single lizard bone in the center. Authorities were notified. Forensics arrived. The arrangement hadn't been touched in weeks. But this time, there was something else. Carved faintly into the canyon wall nearby a sigil. 3 intersecting circles. A triangle at the base. And in the center, a tiny dot. One officer Navajo refused to go near it. He said it looked like a protection seal. Or a ward. To keep something in, he muttered. At headquarters, the symbol was analyzed. A cultural anthropologist was brought in. She confirmed the geometry aligned not with indigenous symbols, but with Western ceremonial magic. Specifically, the Enochian system, a set of rituals designed to open portals between planes of existence. But why would David, a man of finance, be drawing Enochian sigils in the New Mexico wilderness? Unless he wanted to open something. Let's pause. Take stock of what we know. David was obsessed with numbers, thresholds, and the death of the self. He deleted every trace of his digital identity before vanishing. He left behind coded references to 148, portals, and transformation. And he planted a ritual structure in the middle of nowhere. It starts to look less like a disappearance, and more like a calculated metaphysical experiment. One theory popular among occult researchers is that David was attempting to transcend the physical dimension, not figuratively, literally. They point to writings by John Dee, Aleister Crowley, and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, all of whom described rituals involving the spiral, numerical frequency, and desert isolation as part of ascension mechanics. In this view, David wasn't escaping the world. He was trying to exit it. But skeptics push back. If David planned this so carefully, where's the evidence of survival? No DNA. No recent purchases. No sightings backed by cameras, fingerprints, or phone pings. That's when a new piece of the puzzle emerged, buried in an old filing cabinet. 3 months after David disappeared, a Taos gas station captured a blurry video. Timestamp, the 3rd of December, 3:17 a.m. A man enters hood up, face obscured. He buys a lighter, trail mix, and water. As he turns, a tattoo on his forearm briefly flashes 3 interlocked rings, the same shape carved into the canyon wall. The tape was grainy, facial ID inconclusive. But the man's gait, his posture was consistent with David's known physical markers. If it was him, he wasn't gone. He was hiding. Or worse, changed. Several months later, A Taos bookstore reported someone using a fake name to special order 2 titles, Libernal and Psychonaut, Crossing the Abyss, Rituals for the End of Ego. The buyer paid in cash. No phone number. But according to the clerk, the man was soft-spoken, intense. When asked why he wanted those books, he replied, "You can't rebuild the self until you tear it apart." Then he smiled and left. These sightings faded. No further leads. No new activity. But the pattern kept surfacing. Threes, spirals, silence, disappearance. It's as if David was weaving himself into the mythos of the desert, one fragment at a time. A personal mythology, played out in real time. Whether you believe in magic or madness, in rituals or mental illness, this much is clear. David Stone did not want to be found. He didn't vanish by mistake. He vanished by design. The real question is, did he succeed in escaping the world? Or just himself? Years have passed, and still no body. No official cause. No closure. But David Stone hasn't faded. He's become a signal. In online forums, he's mythologized. Some call him the Spiral Walker. Others believe he's part of a secret project, the psychic equivalent of MK Ultra. There are posts dissecting every journal entry, threads that claim he was recruited by a desert cult. One user insists David cracked a vibration code and crossed into an alternate frequency. The spiral symbol has appeared in graffiti, street murals, and even tattoos. A whisper network of believers or copycats growing in the shadows. But the deeper you go, the more the story splits in two. In one version, David is dead. A brilliant but fractured mind, lost to delusion. The spiral is just a metaphor. The rituals were desperate attempts to control a disintegrating identity. He died alone in the rocks, his body scattered by animals, dust to dust. But in the other version, David transcended. He found the pattern, broke the loop, walked past the edge of consensus reality into whatever lies beyond it. And if that's true, it raises terrifying possibilities. That reality isn't as fixed as we think. That with the right numbers, the right words, the right intention, you can fold the veil back and leave. His case file remains open in New Mexico. Every few years, a new detective is assigned. They flip through the reports. They look at the maps. They call the old contacts. And eventually, they all walk away with the same feeling. This was never just a missing person. His family held a memorial in 2003. No body, no headstone, just a stone marker in the Taos wilderness, carved with one word, transitus, Latin for the passage. A year later, someone defaced the marker. They scratched a spiral into the stone, added another phrase beneath, Inveniete, it will find you. No one saw who did it, but the local ranger swears he saw a man standing at the edge of the ridge that morning, tall, wearing a hood. He turned, smiled, and disappeared behind the rocks. Cameras caught nothing. No prints, no boot marks, just absence. Just like David. The question now isn't, where did David go? It's, what was he trying to show us? Was it a warning? A blueprint? An invitation? Maybe the spiral isn't just a shape. Maybe it's a map. A guide to leaving the loop, breaking out of pattern, becoming something more. But at what cost? David's journals repeat a phrase again and again. The self must die. Maybe that's what he meant all along. That you don't cross over with your identity. You shed it. You become absence. You become the man who isn't there.